This is the Dzogchen Sende Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. Come, let us meditate like a Jedi. Or perhaps I could say, it is Qui-Gon Jinn Tuesday early morning. Let us meditate like a Jedi. This morning, I would love to explore with you the 13th passage of Spaciousness of Dorje Sempa, composed oh so many centuries ago by the great Buddhist reformer Garab Dorje. Some meditators strive to put their minds into a thought-free state. Thinking this gives them access to something subtle. They isolate themselves in lonely places. Examined closely, this is seen to be a form of conceptual meditation. So I'm going to tap button 9. Superstitious rigidity, be it mental or physical, no superstitious rigidity. Be it mental or physical, is remotely beneficial. Okay. Let's explore this thesis. So this is what is observed by the practice text. The mental rigidity of trying not to think, and the physical rigidity of complete isolation away from society, within the superstitious hope that it will somehow be beneficial. Let's explore this in greater detail. An individual asked me what my opinion was on the religion in which I was raised after a career of meditating. This is best answered and put into perspective by exploring the marriage of archaeology and anthropology. Examination of unearthed ancient prehistoric cadavers show evidence multiple times that individuals maimed in youth were so nurtured by the members of their tribe that they lived into old age. That speaks of a culture that was flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind, on whole, largely. This could be described as proto-communism, something that appeals to our anterior cingulate gyrus, which is the seat of empathy, something that appeals to our oxytocin reward circuit, which experiences meaning from cooperation. A society which helps its members to be as groovy as Qui-Gon Jinn. Quite a good day for this simile, would you not agree? So this, for the best of our estimates, this occurred approximately 300,000 years ago in the past, and it persisted for approximately 287,000 years. But the second law of thermodynamics reminds us that nothing lasts forever, and change is inevitable. Sometimes the change is beneficial, sometimes it's harmful, sometimes it is a mixture of both. Case in point, the Neolithic Revolution. Was it nice that people had more food? Yes, who wants to starve? However, it became a fertile breeding ground for the proto-capitalism that turned the cooperative mentality on its head, driving its denizens to be much, much more rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, making people much less like groovy Qui-Gon Jinn and much more like grumpy Mace Windu, much less like the groovy dude, and much more like the grumpy Big Lebowski. So let's look at the first two points of comparison. Are we flexible, or are we rigid? For me, that's a tongue twister. So let's move forward. All complex life forms on this planet have evolved to think symbolically. Go back far enough, and our ancestors simply perceived. Over time, they began to recall past perceptions and imagine future perceptions, and that became the scaffolding upon which our concept of mind was built. So therefore, it should come as little surprise that humans have been, in every human culture, we find literal statements, figurative statements, similes, metaphors, and hyperbolic statements. No one in their right mind uses these in an attempt to deceive, but as a way to express an idea viscerally. Sadly, over time, similes become metaphors, and metaphors can become mistaken as literal teachings by the rigid, by the fearful, by the superstitious. And a minority of them are so controlling and so elitist that whether they believe in the myths or not, they use them to dominate others. I will often reference Warner Brothers cartoons when making a point. If you feel comfortable citing the mythologies that you were raised with, whether they were Judeo-Christian, whether they were Greek, whether they were indigenous, whether they were shamanistic, whether they were East Asian, that's fine. The question is, do you view them flexibly as metaphors and archetypes, or rigidly as the law written in stone? It's been my experience that if you want to be more like the Buddha's foolish cousin Devadatta, then by all means be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. If you want to be like Devadatta's wise cousin Gautama, also known as Shakyamuni, also known as the Buddha, then traverse a path that helps us to effortlessly be flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. Now, is there a path that helps us to effortlessly manifest these attributes? It's been my experience that neuroscience says yes. Yes, there is. And I'd like to show you that path right now. The path of being rigid, the path of being controlling, says, hey, man, actively focus and actively analyze all the time. And an experimental attitude toward this will reveal that over-focus and over-analysis can so fatigue our dorsolateral and medial prefrontal cortex that we begin presenting with at least some of the symptoms of clinical depression, as well as triggering our amygdala, the seat of both anxiety and aggression. Now, the path of anxiety and aggression will take you many places other than peace and love. Even if you focus and analyze peace and love, by the very nature of the limitations of our central nervous system, it's going to trigger our amygdala. But the good news is that neither the amygdala nor the prefrontal cortex constitute the entirety of our central nervous system. Consider, if you will, our spinal cord, could be described as the hub of our autonomic nervous system. When we take a relaxing break from the exhausting habit of actively competing against our own autonomic nervous system and instead passively cooperate with it, we can notice the anxiety and aggression of our amygdala calming down. We can notice the empathy of our anterior cingulate gyrus being gently and non-neurotically stimulated. We can observe an increase of peace. This autonomic nervous system could be thought of as having two aspects, which we will explore right now. Consider, if you will, the idea of mindfulness. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we have already evolved to automatically access the middle bit of our spinal cord, which could be described as the hub of our sympathetic nervous system. It has evolved to help us to notice in a very special way. It has evolved to help us to vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly notice all mind's antics of perception. Seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, and the like, including the full spectrum of human emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. All of them, from the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. But what are we to do with that which we noticed? In a word, we meditate. But how does that work? Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we have already evolved to automatically access the tippy top and the very bottom of that same spinal cord. These two extremes could be described as the hub of our parasympathetic nervous system, which has evolved to help us to so physically relax and mentally release during our exhalation. That which we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel less stressful, less permanent, less defining, and less graspable. At least for a moment, at least a little bit, until the next inhalation where the cycle begins afresh. So we're not looking at an on-off switch. We're looking at a flow state. Enlightenment is not some state that we access. It is simply our cooperation, making a habit of cooperating with our autonomic nervous system. Allow me to introduce you to the lazy bastard path of enlightenment. In the penultimate chapter, or penultimate passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha is said to have explained that one could master his path in as little as 7 days. What if enlightenment was simply getting so good at the Buddha's Eightfold Path that we wind up practicing it spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively? Have we ever done anything remotely like that? Yes. As children, we were taught to master the art of using the commode instead of our diapers. We were taught to master the art of brushing our teeth. We were taught to master the art of tying our shoes. We were taught to master the art of riding a bicycle. We were taught to master the art of reading and writing and arithmetic. And although most of us do not have PhDs or not Nobel laureates, we know our ABCs. We can read. We can do simple arithmetic. In fact, we've gotten so good at those things that when we look at a street sign, we cannot help but read it. We do so spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. Though we might not have a Pulitzer Prize in journalism, we can still read. What if mindfulness and meditation were the dynamo that turned the wheels and the cogs of the metaphoric enlightenment machine? Practicing mindfulness and meditation in harmony with our inhalations and exhalations at least once every 12 hours or so causes us to automatically, viscerally, intuitively notice change, notice non-graspability. Watching and resting in harmony with our breath once every 12 hours or so sets in motion the neurological environment that helps us to involuntarily be kinder. It causes our intention to be kinder, our communication to be kinder, our conduct to be kinder, our commerce to be kinder, which constitutes 50% of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. The more we notice and relax in harmony with our breathing, the more we experience, the more our choices and utterances and deeds flow, not from contrived calculation, not from wild scatteredness, but instead from love's deeply centered spontaneity. This is what could be described as right effort, or effortless effort, or doing without doing, or wu wei, or going with the flow, or being in the zone. This is the key to using all the organelles of our brain in the most sustainable manner. This is why Einstein not only recommended the STEM, but also recreation, also creativity exercises. He insisted that creativity was intelligence recreating, intelligence at play. Read the biographies of Nobel laureates, and they talk about their devotion to STEM, but then they hit a roadblock and they had to retreat and rest their mind and their body and inject some whimsy and some recreation, and then they were able to see connections that heretofore they could not see, and make the quantum leap, the small change that generates a huge difference that resulted in humanity's betterment. in a nutshell, why is superstitious rigidity of either mind or body not remotely beneficial? Because superstitious rigidity sets us on the path of being fearful, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. It blinds us to the cognitive dissonance that can wake us up from our foolish actions. The scientific method is not a collection of knowledge. It's a set of tools to help us navigate the treacherous experience of interfacing with the world around us. If we are so rigid and superstitious that we cannot look at the fruits of our actions with complete vulnerability and second guess our assumptions and second guess our course of actions, then we wind up where America is right now, in fascism, completely ignoring reports of scientists or the consensus of scientists, criminalizing anything that could remotely undermine the short-term pursuit of financial gain and human domination. That is the fruit of Yang's path of religious patriarchy. And its proponents insist, oh, that's human nature, but that's a dishonest statement. Our dopamine-oriented system is designed as a survival mechanism to keep us alive. It rewards the type of ruthlessness necessary to ensure that we will fuck and feed and fight and flee and faint and fawn just enough to ensure the next generation. But it's not the only part of our brain. A much larger part of our brain is dedicated to the oxytocin system that rewards for the path of cooperation. If we have a survival mechanism to keep us alive, and it's done a pretty good job. But if we stay stuck in our survival mechanism, our life will be shallow, unfulfilling, and counterproductive. We evolved both mechanisms to work together cooperatively. If we actively only focus on our survival mechanisms, not only will it create an unfulfilling life for the individual, it spells doom for the species at large. That is what I've learned. That is my current perspective on the religions in which I was raised, as seen through the lens of a lifetime of authentic meditation. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. For Meditate Like a Jedi is made possible thanks to the generosity of viewers just like you.